Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this edition of the Futurecasting event. Futurecasting is an action of the Cape Town Resilience Strategy, delivered in partnership between the Resilience Department in the City of Cape Town and the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. This is about the 10th Futurecasting event that has been held thus far, and commonly what we do in these events is choose a prominent or plausible urban risk. Today, we'll be thinking about cyber resilience, to bring together some compelling and interesting speakers from a wide range of sectors in order to share content, to debate, and to have a conversation with stakeholders who commonly come from business, government, civil society, and academia. In recent editions of Futurecasting, we have dealt with diverse topics such as flooding, the impacts of climate change on mental health, the impacts of global risks such as the war of Ukraine on Cape Town. We've dealt with heat waves and similar risks, whether they be environment, natural, man-made, or the like. Today, I'd like to thank Ameshni Naidu, the Director of IS&T in the City of Cape Town, for playing a large role in putting today's panel together. She is also the Coordinator and Program Director for today's event. And a very special warm welcome to our diverse speakers from a range of organizations who are prepared to give up their time this morning to share their insights and ideas. And also thank you to the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, a trusted partner of the City of Cape Town and the Western Cape government, for being so good, as usual, about bringing people together to work together, to collaborate, talk, and share. I think cyber resilience is an important topic, and for many people, it is not a topic that is often considered, at least until it occurs, a cyber shock that is. And when one thinks of where we are in the world today, in our increasingly connected world, with the prospect of even greater turmoil in Europe, cyber warfare and related issues are a very, very big issue. And we cannot afford to lose continuity in a range of processes that ensure the sustainability of our businesses and our government and our connectivity. Cyber resilience is vitally important for the continuation and sustainability of a wide range of systems, often which bubble up, or at least appear below us, and which we don't actively think about until something poor or bad happens. So I'd like to hand over to Ameshni. Ameshni, thank you very much for putting this together. Over to you. Ameshni?
Thank you for that introduction. As highlighted, Gareth looks after. Sorry, just to confirm, you're able to hear me? Okay, perfect. All right, so just to highlight, from my side, thank you very much to Gareth for that introduction. I am thoroughly looking forward to this session. I think it's an important topic around cybersecurity and where we sit in the context of Africa, South Africa, Cape Town, Western Cape, in this global world of where we've been hearing a lot about the concept of cybersecurity out into the market and why it's become more important and what is the resilience element behind cybersecurity. Alongside me, I have a great panel of experts, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to this chat with you. And let me give my thank you to each one of you for taking your time out to join this panel, where we can share with each other, but also share into the market around what it really means to be cyber resilient and give our views around that and help this audience to take out great nuggets from this conversation is what I'm really hoping for, that can help them into their organizations as they think about how to become cyber resilient into the future. So I'm going to go through the panel members as a starting point. And as we do that, perhaps as I get to each one of you, if you could just give a quick snippet of who you are and your context behind how you fit in from a cybersecurity perspective as an expert in this space, alongside the questions that I will be initially posing to you. And from there, really bringing it out into a more broader context conversation that I hope that we will quite nicely bring together. So firstly, Itumeleng, welcome to the call. Welcome to this future casting event. And really, I think from a context point of view, my question to you as we start to think about this topic of cyber resilience is number one, let's just bring it down a bit in terms of this word cybersecurity and this word cyber resilience. I think that for many, like big words, I call it like digital, like transformation, these can mean very different things to different people. And so in the context of today's session, if you have
Thanks, Omesh. I don't know if the glitch is on my side, but I missed the last few words that you said, but I think I got the crux of the question, so I should be able to proceed. Thank you, Omeshni. Thank you, Gareth and the team for creating such an important platform to have these conversations between the public, private sector, NGOs, etc., for all of us to come together and just share thoughts around how we manage these risks for our country, for our businesses and organizations that we are part of. So as mentioned, I'm Itumeleng Mahati. I'm an executive of information security for the Standard Bank Group. Before that, I headed up information security for Sasol. So I've got a broad understanding of security in the manufacturing business as well as financial services. So I'm hoping to bring some of that experience and knowledge into the conversation to share with the team. Just as a disclaimer, the views that I'll be sharing today will really be my personal views, not the views of my employer. So it's not Standard Bank's point of view, but what I know based on my experience and the time that I've spent playing a leader in information security space. Now, just going back to the question around cybersecurity being a broad term, and you're absolutely right, it can be used in different contexts, but we really need to simplify what it means or what it is that we're referring to when we're saying cybersecurity. And I thought the simplest way for me that I would describe what cybersecurity is from someone who's not necessarily exposed to the field, I would say it's the ability to safely use technology without the risk of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information being compromised. That's it in simple terms. So it's really a trust-based risk assessment or risk protection methodology where you want to know that when you're using technology, the data that is confidential will remain confidential and will only be seen by authorized personnel. And you trust that the data will not be changed in any way, updated by a bad actor through unpopular ways or ways that have not been authorized. You also want to know that the systems that you're using will be available to support your operations or your business as expected. I think if broadly you can cover all of those three areas, you can then say that is a cybersecurity focus in any business. Now, the next question that you had asked was around cyber resilience, and which is really what we want to talk about today. How do you identify a business that is cyber resilient, or what does it mean for the business? And in my view, what I've seen successful businesses do, businesses that are seen as cyber resilient, it's businesses that take information security or cybersecurity beyond just being an IT challenge or problem to manage. But it runs across the business. It's part of the culture of the business. It's baked into how you do things across the business. So that's where you would bring in your business continuity capabilities, you bring in your enterprise resilience capabilities, audit functions, risk management, even human resources will need to be part of the value chain in ensuring that you're able to manage your cybersecurity capability. So what it really means is that you embed security across the ecosystem, making sure that your model, your program, your approaches, your policies would be able to apply in any context across the business and not just based on what technology requires or IT requires. So that's really how I would see a cyber resilient business, and businesses that have done it well have been able to bring all of those functions together. So I would say cyber is really a business risk. It shouldn't be seen as an IT risk. It is a business risk. IT is an enabler to that. And organizations that are resilient and doing it well have actually managed to even bring it to a board conversation. So cyber should not be left to just be part of the network team, ensuring that you've got the uptime for your firewalls. But actually at board level, there should be a critical conversation around how are we protecting the business? How are we building the trust with our customers? And how are we ensuring that any data that we process or collect from our customers is protected as expected? It is really a license to operate. So how do you manage and protect that license if you're not having that conversation at the right level at the board? So I'd say if it hasn't gotten there, it's very important that that conversation gets elevated in any organization, whether public or private, to the right levels in organizations where the correct decisions can be made around how you're going to invest to protect the business. So organizations really need to double down on mitigation strategies and implement cutting edge countermeasures. But what it really boils down to is having a defense mindset and assuming a breach mindset as well. So assuming you've already been breached and respond accordingly, instead of saying you will always protect yourself against every breach. I mean, we've seen stats showing that in the last 2 years, just in the COVID times and lockdowns, cyber incidents have gone up 240%. So at some point, something will get through your network. So rather work on the assumption that you've been breached than assuming that nothing will get through your network. That's really a starting point in how you approach the mindset required in the business to be a cyber resilient business. Now, I just want to share some of the key things that you would need to consider if you're building a cyber resilient business. Very important to know your operations, because each business is unique. Like I said, I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in financial services. They all have a different context, or they both have a different context of risk that they need to manage if you compare a bank to a manufacturing business. So model the threats against your end-to-end value chain, taking full account of your third-party risks. I think third parties is quite a critical point for all of us at this point, because we have partners that we work with and we share information across the board. How do we have a good understanding of the threat posture of all the third parties that we have to work with? You need to strengthen defenses across the board from a people, process, and technology perspective would be one of the things. So it's not just about implementing the latest shiny technology, but understand the culture in the organization. Are people made aware of the risks that are exposed to their specific roles? And are you providing the right tools, the knowledge and understanding of how they should then behave as users of technology to ensure that they're not exposed to any cyber incidents using technology in your organization? So it's really important that you build a culture from a people perspective and build the right processes that will then support that culture across the business. But I've also seen is that, I just wanted to share one more thing around the agility of your program. So you might have a plan in place where you have certain things that you want to implement, but threat actors are continuously changing their tactics and ways of doing things. They are very agile in how they approach a business based on the vulnerability that they see. So it requires that your business also be agile in how they implement solutions and quickly adjust your strategy and approach based on what you're seeing in your threat landscape. So those are just some of the things that I thought, let me share around what is a cyber resilient business and how you would understand cybersecurity. Back to you, Mishni.
Great, thanks so much for that, Tumeleng, very helpful. And I really enjoyed the concept of, it's not just a tech initiative, and that cybersecurity shouldn't just be seen as something that a technology department should own and run, and that the reality of where cybersecurity has moved to, that to truly become resilient in this space, that the business at its entirety, right from the top downward, needs to own this. So, that was a great takeout point for me. So thank you for that. So, I think that was a great definition around cybersecurity in terms of how we should think about it in its very broad term, from a protection mechanism into the organization, and how we really are the defenders to ensure that we protect our space in this particular area. So I think, Gabrielle, I'm going to turn to you next. And really, from your viewpoint, in terms of, I think, great to get your introduction, in terms of the space of that you bring from a cybersecurity view, and how your role ties into that. And then from there, I think, Timiling has spoken to what cybersecurity is, what it means to be a cyber resilient organization. What I'd like to ask you a bit more about is, what is your view of cybersecurity here in South Africa? It's kind of, if you had to give us the state of the nation address of where cybersecurity is and what it looks like, what would you tell us about it?
Sure, I can do some high-level introductions, largely in terms of the policy landscape, which I think matters. But I'm Gabriela Razzano. I'm the CEO of a civic tech company based in Cape Town, an open data civic tech hub. So actually, I do a lot more work on transparency than I do on security, but the two are very much bedfellows. And so I do a lot of work on data governance and data protection. But obviously being aware, as we say, that cyber is not just about data, but also about systems and architecture. So I have a legal background, which is why I spend so much time looking at policy and law and those kinds of things. I think it's important to start off by, I've made notes because I can't not. But I think it's important to start off by just noting that cybersecurity is very much an important consideration at the local level. And if there are any kinds of gaps, it's that a lack of understanding of how important that is. Certainly currently cybersecurity and in the legal and policy space in South Africa is very much only being considered at a kind of a national lens. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. One, that's not where the direct risks come from necessarily, although they come from both. But also that at the national level, and you see this throughout the African region, because security is such a politicized, cybersecurity in particular, but security generally is such a politicized area of law and work, it's very difficult to get countries to actually collaborate on cybersecurity. That's why, for instance, there's an African Union Convention on data protection and cybersecurity called the Malabo Convention, which was relatively progressive and is still not effective because not enough countries have ratified it. So for South Africa signed it but didn't ratify it. And a lot of that has to do with the controversy with trying to dictate. Security agencies tend to obviously see security as not something that you collaborate on. And I think the nature of cyber risks is very difficult for these kind of agencies and entities to deal with, precisely because it requires collaboration to be effective. When you talk about breaches, in a globalized world, nothing is happening just domestically. And there's a lovely link, if you ever go on Kaspersky's map, to look at how cyber threats and cyber attacks are happening. That's fundamentally cross-border, and collaboration is totally necessary, but it's very difficult to get countries to collaborate. And so, it's really local governments need to be making their own strategies now and thinking how they can do that within a collaborative context. But waiting for direction is certainly not the way. I think South Africa, the broad areas that are related are kind of cybersecurity, cyber crimes, surveillance, and data protection. In terms of the main kinds of trends or happenings in those areas, there is a national cybersecurity policy framework, but that's very high level. There was a cybersecurity and cyber crimes bill that eventually got split because, and I did some work on the cybersecurity and cyber crimes bill, particularly because the cybersecurity provisions were actually so broad that it was very difficult to tell what the remits of a lot of those activities were. So the cybersecurity bill is still another process, but the Cyber Crimes Act has been signed into law, and it creates some new crimes and creates some law enforcement powers, which are the main highlights. That's obviously important. But you already see sort of splits at national level. So there's a cyber defense strategy being developed by the Department of Defense. And there is what they call a cyber command based in the Department of Defense. But that is partially operational because they have insufficient budget and funds. I think I was looking at some parliamentary notes, and they'd been asking for a budget of 800 million for 3 years, which when you think about which they didn't get, and when you just think about even from a private sector perspective, or I run an NGO, and I know what I pay for human capacity in the area of technology. I mean, it's difficult to think how you'd run a cyber command, from a capacity perspective with those kinds of numbers. And that's a real issue, and that Cyber Command says it's a real issue. And I think that's the most interesting area of a lot of, for companies, for local governments, and for national departments, is it's very much a human problem, actually, cybersecurity. It's a capacity problem in terms of having the right human resources in place to deal with cybersecurity threats and cyber breaches, but also just making sure that every single person has some kind of digital and cyber competency, because of course you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I mean, I think we only need to think back to one of my favorite stories is how the Pentagon was hacked in 2008. It wasn't some high level complex, cyber warfare. What happened? They say it was Russians, although there's controversy now because now they think it wasn't the Russians, but it may have been the Russians. Essentially, they just scattered USBs with malware in the parking lot of the Pentagon parking lot. And what do human beings do? People on their way into their office would pick up these USBs, and then as soon as they got in the office, put them into their machines to see what was on them. I mean, this is not, what I mean? This stuff is not as complex as we sometimes think it is. And so it's a human problem. But anyway, so in South Africa, we have Cyber Crimes Act, we have surveillance legislation in RICA, which, as you know, was challenged recently to be, and then we have the data protection law, which I think is a very important component, obviously, of the environment, and a very direct and important consideration for businesses and cities. You should all be working on your POPI compliance, and it is very much a governance level issue. It's part of my chief governance risk in my organization. And I think there are challenges because, a lot of these laws are drafted in a way that's not very accessible. But there is an information commissioner established, has been since December 2017. I mean, that law was drafted in 2013 and was only operational in 2021. So there is the obvious issue that the law is not very quick to keep up to date with, technology and technological risks. So there is a lot of impetus on organization and local governments to take proactive steps in these regards, regardless of what the legal obligations might say, because they're often insufficient. Those are the highlights.
Great. Thank you, Gabriella. That was great. I particularly liked the simplicity of the Pentagon explanation around, kind of how easy it is to actually be vulnerable in this space, and a great example of how it's not just a tech initiative or I think sometimes we see cybersecurity as this very complicated technical word, and we think policies, and like you've just talked about, legislation and the politics behind it, as opposed to organization can do to just ensure that they're as resilient as possible in the space. And it does come down to, how does it become the business of the everyday people, that they understand it in the most simplest way, and how can we uncomplicate this? I'm going to introduce Hilton Arendt and get him to give you a view of what he's up to in the Western Cape government and a bit of his history in the cybersecurity world. And I think Hilton, for me, Itumeleng quite nicely spoke to, what is this broad term of cybersecurity and cyber resilience? What does that mean? I think Gabriella spoke to us about kind of the legal thinking and the complexities and the politics, almost as some of us in the government world can understand about, but the politics behind it. And I guess what I'd like to hear from you is in the Western Cape government space, having worked, being now working in the organization, how do you think about cycle methods and steps that the Western Cape is, what are you doing in the space to make it practical for your organization?
Sure. Thanks, Amisni, and thanks for the opportunity to engage the audience on this matter. I'm Milton Arendse. I'm the CEO of Western Cape Government, and within my portfolio, we cover the transversal functions, ICT functions for the whole of the provincial government. So we deal with everything from infrastructure, applications development, information security, our web development services, and also our normal day-to-day operations within the various departments. So it's just quite a broad spectrum of work that we're dealing with. So Messi, in terms of the cybersecurity in Western Cape government, firstly, cybersecurity is being managed as a provincial strategic risk. So on a quarterly basis, the head of our enterprise risk management has to present to the cabinet on the province's strategic risk, and information security is one of the top risks that's been identified. But may I also add to that, there was mention of the political environment within government. Whilst it's been seen as a provincial strategic risk, it's also been funded as such. So I must acknowledge that politically, administratively, it's been seen as a strategic risk, but it's also managed, as I said, and importantly, it's funded. So the reason why cybersecurity is such an important focus for us is because our citizens and our customers, if we can call them customers, or our clients, are most of them are the poorest of the poor. So our citizens travel to sites and our physical facilities. We need to make sure that services are always available to them. And then we're also pushing information to our digital platforms. And therefore, it's important to build citizens' trust. So from two perspectives, information security are critical for us. Firstly, is from a business continuity perspective, making sure that when our citizens who have to pay to get to these service points, when they get there, that services are available and that it's running efficiently. And secondly, is making sure that citizens trust us with the information. Because if they do not trust us with the information, the uptake and usage of all our digital transformation interventions will be very low. So if we try to push certain services to the digital platforms and citizens don't trust that platform, they won't utilize it. So it's a key part of our citizens' centricity and our citizen obsession, making sure that our information security revolves around making sure the citizen can use our services, and also it's accessible and it's available. So that's the approach that we're taking in terms of information security from our side. So in order to get there, we're focusing on what we call our cybersecurity ecosystem, because cybersecurity is not just about the technology. It's more than just technology. So whilst we're focusing on having the right technologies in place and having the latest and the greatest technologies in place and the right technology capabilities, making sure that our software have got the relevant patches and up to date, the key thing is also that we need to make sure that we have the right skills. So we do not have the funding and the salary levels to have those information security experts. You know, in those multinational companies where there's the experts, and also in the private sector where you have the guys, but they come at a huge cost. So we have a core team of internal resources that deal with our information security, but it's supplemented by external resources. And then sometimes you need those experts to do deep dives for you, and that will also make sure that they have that ability. But the key thing is that you need to make sure that we continually skill our own team and our own internal team, making sure that there's transfer of skills from external resources to our internal ones. And then there's the issue of the information security governance, which Gabriella has mentioned now, the governance process, the POPI Act, making sure that we comply to the POPI Act and that we put all processes and systems in place that we can adhere. The key thing also for us is the issue of our architecture. So any solution that we develop and that comes onto a network needs to go through our architecture board, and that is where we check the security, whether there's adherence to our security standards. If there's no compliance with adherence to our security standards, we just do not allow that specific solution or technology to come onto our network. And we need to look at alternatives in that case. We try never to say no, but we rather look at alternatives. But through looking at alternatives, we're looking at how do we safeguard our organization, but still be able to provide for the solutions that our client departments require. And then importantly also is our awareness campaigns. We run regular awareness campaigns with our users. We have about 28,000 users within our environment, and we run regular campaigns to make sure that they're up to date with what's happening in the environment, specifically in the context that many of our staff are working from home. So they need to be aware of what's the dangers of working from home, because now your security has to shift to the edge outside of your safe corporate domain. It's now going into the homes of your employees. And how do we protect those devices and the data and information that's been captured there? And how do we make sure that our staff also practice cybersecurity safe principles and processes when they're outside of the work environment? Obviously, there's our circulars that will go out and tell them what they need to do. But the key thing is about the awareness campaigns, not only in the professional environment, official environment, but also in the personal capacities. And then obviously the other part of our ecosystem is just maintaining the comprehensive cybersecurity program that we have in place, where we're looking at our monitoring tools, testing, regular testing, and also making sure that we evaluate our environment at a regular basis, and obviously updating our information security solutions and systems that we have on a regular basis. So, Ms. I'll stand at that point unless there's anything else that you want me to point out, but those is in broad terms, how we deal with it, and also from a political perspective, and also in terms of what are the key focus areas for us, or what are the ultimate goals that we're trying to achieve through information security. Yes, there's the issues pertaining to loss of data and all of those things, reputational risk. To us, key thing is making sure that we build citizen trust and ensuring business continuity.
Great, thanks so much for that, Hilton. I think that was a great view in terms of, I think as you started, you highlighted, the conversation is really about the risk at the most executive level, coming out from a management point of view, and how that's driven into the organization from a people, process, tech perspective, and how that's therefore handled across the board. So that's great to see. I think it very much ties into the conversations that, Tumeleng just spoke to, in terms of how cybersecurity and cyber resilience is broader than just the tech initiative. And I think that it's great to see that the Western Cape government is doing that in its broadest sense. So I'm going to move on to Alan Moon, our final panelist, who is from the city of Cape Town and looks after cybersecurity for the organization. Alan, I think very similar to Hilton. I think my question would be, from a very local government to the citizen. I think similar to Hilton, where the citizens. Can you help to give me a bit of and as you reflect on Hilton's conversation, the similarities of what we're doing perhaps at the city, or whether there's anything else over and above that that's being done at the city in the cyberspace?
Thank you, Mishni. Good morning, all. My name is Alan Moon. I'm the Head of Business Continuity for the City of Cape Town. My day-to-day responsibilities revolve around managing the city's operational security teams and so forth. In terms of the themes which Hilton has listed and discussed at length, many resonate with the city as well. I think some of the key issues are really around people. I think people are at the heart of our operations. And from a culture perspective, it is actually so important that we keep and maintain their sense of belonging and being able to respond and deal with any threat that may come their way. So in terms of what we've seen, there's quite a few threats that are sent or directed towards the City of Cape Town staff, and we've been able to realize those and been able to respond accordingly. So we typically see environments as our payroll department, they get targeted, and those staff are able to be fully aware and respond accordingly. I think in terms of critical programs going forward, something really exciting in the city space is around the city's digital transformation initiatives called CAR. And this is really going to change the city as a digital organization. And together with security, that is a critical enabler. So security is really should be more or less about technology and more about the people and the procedures in order to ensure that services can continue. And I think we're really looking at exciting things going forward. Some things we wanted to chat on from a resiliency perspective, something that I became aware of around 3 or 4 years ago. And as a cybersecurity professional, we're always keen to find out exactly what does this mean? Is this something new? Is this another course, another certification? And if you really go look at resiliency, it's about just balancing what we're doing from a technology perspective versus what we're doing from a resilience and recovery perspective. So traditionally, going back 10, 15 years or so, it was really around protection of our environment, whereas with a resilience approach, it's really about being able to respond accordingly. And I think it's really just about achieving that balance. From a, I think just to echo what Hilton has said, from an awareness perspective, something we've addressed aggressively, and in our spaces where we engage with citizens and with other stakeholders as well. What we've seen in the contact center spaces, whether they be corporate, in the water, electricity, and so forth, we get engaged via multiple channels all the time. And often we, as much as we preach the message that you need to trust but verify, the key thing there is they have to engage. They have to open up that email. they have to open up that attachment. So at a very basic level, they have to respond to those engagements. I think that for us, it's a luxury in able to willy-nilly, potentially, in our inbox, just filter and not open or not engage with people we're not familiar with. But really, in the contact center space, we've seen that that's not a viable option. I think from a cybersecurity perspective and from a strategic perspective, we've seen it being really elevated to council level. And when we engage with executives at many different levels, be it in the HR space, in the financial space, they're very keen to engage and have that conversation. I think to a recent engagement with the city's enterprise risk management department, and I go, Alan, but where's ransomware? Where's that on your radar? Because in many business units, they are attending conferences, they're attending webinars, and there are many different areas which are being discussed. And many of those are cyber issues. And they actually come back, which is great. And they come engage us as the IT department and say, okay, Alan, where are we with this? Are we prepared? Are we able to respond? So those also put together our strategies in terms of dealing with those risks. And at the very basic level, the city has to be in a position to be able to respond, to be resilient. And we think just in terms of our basic IT service continuity practices, in order to make sure that our critical services that are required for service delivery are up and running, available 24/7. On the resilient side of things, so the city has rolled out our business continuity management practices over the past number of years. From a maturity perspective, we're not quite there yet from an enterprise-wide and responsive organization from a BCM perspective, but I think we're definitely getting there. And there are many forums where we constantly engage, both from a cyber perspective, from an IT service continuity, as well as from a BCM perspective. In terms of the current space where we're at, we've just come out of a pandemic, we've gone into a different type of risk from a power perspective. These are all very good conversations to have, which lead to discussions much wider than the cyber resilience, but all very similarly on the resilience side of things. Mishni, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Alan. Super. Yeah, I think that was a great update and some practical examples of areas in the business. And I think, very similar to Western Cape government, where there's the concept of ensuring that the business gets involved. I think what we're seeing from a maturity scaling perspective is that the business themselves is recognizing the risk and the need to know and want to understand more about why they need to be cyber resilient. And I think that is very positive in terms of ensuring that that two-way conversation is happening and happening very well. Okay, so I think that hopefully audience has given you a bit of a government perspective on the local side, on the practicalities of what our teams are doing on the ground in the government space in Western Cape as well as the citizens. Please do, if you have any questions for these experts, that you please do post them on, and I will be tackling them over the session. So don't hesitate to put down your questions, and we will do our best to get to them. So whilst we do that, Itumeleng, I think you heard about kind of the government space and what's happening in terms of cybersecurity. When we spoke about kind of the policies that are being put into place. I think over the last years now, cybersecurity cybersecurity has become much more of a topic if we think about the, the cloud environment that we're seeing a lot of organizations move into, but also because of the fact that there's been this drive around information and ensuring that our information is, kept secure at the right levels. From a bank perspective and working in the financial sector industry, I know that there'll be quite a heavy assurance that customers would be looking to in terms of the information and the data that banks keep. Perhaps, talk to us a bit about this and, what the impact has and how you're finding, kind of the cybersecurity space growing and the impact around cyber resilience and this need for our information needing to be more and more secure. And what are the practical kind of methods or methods?
Thanks, Omeshni. Again, I missed the last bit, but
Around.
should be able to proceed. Okay. All right, let me carry on. I'll pick it up from there. You're on mute now, Omeshni. I think there's a bit of a delay, so let me just carry on anyway. Thanks, Omeshni. Okay. As you can imagine, in financial services, we have quite a complex regulatory and policy landscape that we need to navigate. It is a highly regulated environment, not very different from what I'm hearing from the fellow panelists around what's happening in public services. But what I find becomes even more interesting for a financial services institution that operates across different countries in Africa, that you actually have different approaches that you need to think about depending on the maturity of the country that you're working with. South Africa might be a few steps ahead. We've got the right policies around cyber. The POPIA Act has been put in place, but some countries are still very far behind in just figuring out at country level or at government level what the expectations would be for businesses that operate in those environments. But ultimately, as a group or as a bank, we are still held responsible for ensuring that we're protecting our clients' data, we're protecting all of our systems and ensuring that they're available for our customers as and when required. And Omeshni, you bring out a very important conversation around cloud and how within the public and private sector, companies are really now making big strides in moving critical workloads in the business to the cloud. But from a cybersecurity perspective, it's very important that we understand our responsibility when it comes to implementing or protecting workloads that are sitting in the cloud. It is not Microsoft's responsibility, it's not AWS's responsibility or Google or whoever the cloud provider is. Ultimately, as the business, you need to be able to account to your customers if anything was to happen to the data that's sitting in the cloud. You find that if you look at cloud contracts, when we sign them, they'll come with a very thick contract that explains what the provider will give you. And these are the things that it's very important that we take the time to read and understand that contract and know what we are responsible for. Because some of these things don't always come as standard. It's actually value-added services that you need to buy. But if you don't have that understanding, even if it's a once-off exercise that you're going to take, read through that contract and understand it and know what you're responsible for. Because ultimately, you need to ensure that you are securing all of that data that's still going to be sitting in the cloud. I think that's still a space where, whether public or private, we still need to really spend a lot of time and understanding better how this is going to work. So there's still a lot of work to be done from a cybersecurity perspective when you think about cloud. But I also think you talk about what are some of the things that I'm seeing maybe in the financial services space and how we are then responding to that to ensure that we're able to protect. I think if I just reflect, we all know that the last 2 years have been quite disruptive in so many ways. But even from a cyber perspective, we are seeing a different behavior from threat actors. And each industry and each business needs to understand how the threat landscape has shifted or has changed for their context so that they can have the right strategies in place. And there are so many threats that we face out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every threat that is out there is going to be treated the same way. So if you're able to get to your top 5 or your top 10, you say, if I can tackle these threats, it'll give me 80% value or sort out a lot of my issues. Rather spend time on that. I mean, I've heard from the fellow panelists that the challenges that we have, you might think private sector has it easier when it comes to things like shortage of skills and access to resources. It is a widespread problem. We also have the same challenges around finding the right skills from a cybersecurity perspective, or ensuring that we've got the right people available to really execute against the strategies that we've put in place. So prioritization and ensuring that you've got a risk-based approach is really one way you can approach it. But if I look at some of the key things that I'm seeing as threats from a financial services perspective, I've seen that supply chain attacks, which target our essential software and services, have really increased in the last 2 to 3 years, where we're seeing a lot of these playing out. If you think the SolarWinds incident, the Microsoft, the Log4j incident that we've had to deal with most recently. All of these are examples of how threat actors can just take advantage of your vulnerabilities through the supply chain of your software and spread it out to different cross-sector critical infrastructure. So very important that we've got a good understanding of these supply chain attacks and the way in which they can impact our business. So from a banking perspective, what we're doing to curb this and ensure that we don't have further impacts from supply chain attacks, it's how we manage privileged access and access level into the systems. So knowing who's got access to what system, when did they log on, and why did they log on? And they should only get access when it's required. I think that's very important. If you just provide privileged access to your users, open-ended, without any auditing process, that actually creates a lot of issues for you. Also ensuring that you've got the right tools to detect if there are any anomalies in securing the software is also important. So really just talking about visibility. If you have no visibility of what's happening in your environment, you can't detect if anything unusual is happening, it becomes very difficult for you to resolve. That's just one thing from a supply chain attack as a key focus area that we're looking into. But what I've also seen is that with remote working, insider threats are also increasing. I mean, we talk a lot about every home now becoming a mini data center. You sit at home, you're now doing your own IT support because you don't have someone that can just come to your desk and help you out. A lot of the things you try and resolve yourself. You might have a user installing software that they're not supposed to install on their machine, etc. So insider threats as well have become quite critical, and we need to ensure that our users are aware of the impact or things that they might do unintentionally. So very critical that from a cyber perspective, we manage insider threats. So really nurturing in the employees' responsibility for using your software and your environment, and applying a zero trust principle where you check and double check where it's required to ensure that employees aren't doing things that they're not supposed to do. I mean, you spoke about USBs being used at the Pentagon. It's one of the things that you would want to create awareness on. Limiting employee use of USBs on devices is one way in which Pentagon could have resolved this. Ensure that you're not able to just pick up a USB and plug it into your machine. It needs to be blocked by the right software. And if it really has to be opened, you need to go through the right approval processes to be able to see all of that. That's just one way in which you can look at it. But what I'm also seeing is that user awareness and training has become even more important with people now sitting at home. So we need to ensure that we've got the right training, awareness, and on-the-spot communication where required, where you see in a specific area that there's a focus area required in talking about whatever the threat might be in that specific case. You do not need to wait for that annual training that needs to be done, but set up a session, talk to the team and say, this is what we're seeing in your environment, and this is the type of behavior that you need to to show to ensure that you're protecting the business. Those are just some of the things that we're thinking about. But I really think that culture, if we can drive the mindset and ensure that people are thinking about security first before they do anything, it'll go a long way in ensuring that we're able to protect ourselves. But I'm also seeing a very close collaboration and merge between physical security and information security, because a lot of the things that might take place in the cyberspace actually start with physical security. So if you've got vulnerabilities or loopholes in your physical security, you'll end up with issues in your cybersecurity. So in our business, we're starting to bring the two very closely to work together, where previously they were seen as very separate areas across the business. So those are just some of the things that I would say from a financial services perspective, those are risks that we're managing and how we're approaching them commercially.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Titumeleng. Very helpful. All right. Yeah, I think, hopefully that gives you a view that importance of understanding for each one of them looks like, and therefore applying the right type of security strategy based on our environment. And I really like the concept of physical security because it's an easier way to help our cybersecurity when they think about how it gets applied in the physical security. To move on to questions that our audience has provided us. Hilton, so we have a question from the audience around how it is that we measure. So how do you measure whether you are building and maintaining trust with citizens of the Western Cape, specifically with respect to cyber and information security? What are some of the measures that you use to measure trust?
Mishni, that's coincidentally one of the issues that we've grappled with about a week ago when we had a discussion, when we had a strategy discussion around our information security. And that was the one question, because my point that I brought into the meeting was, in that session, was that we need to build citizen trust. It needs to be one of the key foundations of our information security campaign, our ecosystem. And the question was exactly that one. So how do we do it? And it's a difficult one, and we need to look at what will be proxy indicators for that. But what I have proposed is that we need to look at, firstly, whether we have an increase in uptake in usage of our digital services. So if that is one of it, we understand what are these different applications that we have out there and the number of users. Firstly, is there any increase in the uptake in usage? And secondly, whether there has been, during any period, a leakage of information, or where the information of our citizens have been compromised. So the one way that you will be able to build trust is to make sure that the information never gets compromised or leaked. And second one is our metric will be in terms of uptake in usage. And I know it's not the best metrics, but our team is still working around just fine-tuning that specific metric in terms of how do we build citizen trust. And one can also say, if there's no negative comments in the press or on social media on the information security of Western Cape government and our processes, then that should also be an indicator that citizens trust us, because as soon as something goes wrong, it will hit the social media, it will hit the media, and we'll be able to see whether trust is declining in that sense. But there won't be a physical audit to check whether people are trusting us. It will be those indicators that we'll use to see whether we are building the trust amongst our citizens.
Great, thanks for that, Hilton. Much appreciated. All right, Alan, there seems to be a question very similarly on our, as part of our cyber resilience strategy, what is it that the city is doing to build capacity to deal with cybersecurity apart from leveraging third-party service providers?
Thank you, thanks, Irene, for the question. Capacity is, I think, in the cybersecurity domain, a national issue. It really is a scarce skill, which I think in public and private environments, we do struggle to gain the right skill. From a city perspective, I do manage a small team as part of our annual workplace skills planning initiatives. We try and plan for the year ahead in terms of critical initiatives, where there are gaps as part of their personal development plans, so that we're able to ensure that we gain the correct skills, both in the short and longer term from a development perspective. So not just at the technology level, but also at the professional level as well. So looking towards courses such as cybersecurity analyst training, certified ethical hacking training, CISSP, information security management training, and so forth. And that's how we try and build capacity. In terms of additional people or bodies, very challenging in our environment. Typically, we would bring them in at a junior level and train them up and develop them ourselves. We're currently trying to fill a few positions, and it's really challenging, whether it's in the security architecture space, whether it's on the operational side of things. It's a tough ask. But yeah, that is basically what we're doing. We're basically developing people internally, and potentially in the future there might be space for internships and so forth. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Alan. Appreciate it. Then a final question from the audience, and this is both to Hilton and Alan. It highlights you both have tough jobs to protect the critical infrastructure for the province and the city. How does cyber resilience extend to operational technologies? Hilton, you want to take that?
Misni, thanks so much.
There we go.
Thanks so much, Misni. I'll take that one. So how does it relate to operational technology? And now, so the question was raised pertaining to infrastructure, or what he shouldn't pretext it in the terms of infrastructure, and then ask about operational technology. But let me just start with the infrastructure. A key part of our protecting our information and our cybersecurity strategy was our cloud migration strategy. And Utimeling has elaborated on that in terms of her environment previously. But the cloud migration was a key enabler for us to strengthen our information security, the information security, but also our business continuity. And that stood us in good stead, especially during the pandemic, because we had quite a few of our workloads already migrated to the cloud, and we could continue working as an entity. So coming to the operational technologies, so we have various monitoring tools within our environment. So from an operations perspective, we manage that, and we do not have the capacity to fight these automated attacks, which comes at 110,000 attempts per hour. We just cannot do it. Physically, it's not possible. So we have invested in automated tools to monitor, detect, prevent, and protect our environment as it relates to cyber attacks on a daily basis. Yes, most of it can be repelled, can be prevented on a daily basis. But if there is a breach, we do have access to more detailed and more stronger expertise in that space. From a operational technologies perspective, specifically linking now to our operating systems. And here we have to invest in the latest operating systems and Office 365 software. And we, in our engagements with Microsoft, that was a strong feature of our engagements with our enterprise agreement, looking at the security part of our ecosystem, especially as it relates to the end user devices and looking at the operating systems. And then obviously in terms of our operations, there's the issue of software packaging, the application security, applying multi-factor authentication, the issues of web encryption that we need to focus on, and then also the systems hosting. So when it comes to web encryption, making sure we have all our certificates up to date and that we do not have any expired certificates. In terms of application and security, we make sure that all missing HTTP security headers are applied. So there's a lot that we're doing in that space. And then I'd also like to link to the work that the comments has been made by Tumeling in terms of people working at home. So we have a lot of unmanaged devices in our environment. So we need to monitor the state of those in devices. So we try to root out all unmanaged endpoint devices. And those devices that's not receiving updates, remember how people are working from home. And if they do not come into the office regularly, their devices don't get the updates. So we monitor them and then we force them to come and do the updates on a regular basis. And obviously there's the unsupported, those devices with Windows 7 on that still have Windows 7 operating systems. We're running a project to remove them. So there's quite a lot of work that we're doing in our internal operational environment to address that in terms of the operational technologies. So I do not want to go into the in-depth and the detail of exactly what it is, but those are the high level, if I can say at high level, the things that we're doing in terms of our operational technologies and how we secure environment and also future-proof, hopefully, environment. But as everybody knows, your information ecosystem is just as strong as your last scan or what happened a minute ago. You can never predict what's going to happen the next minute or thereafter, but we can just try and strengthen our posture as much as we can to prevent or to try and prevent future hacks. Thanks, Amisni. I hope that answers Suren's question.
Great, thanks, Hilton. Yeah, I think that was helpful. And Alan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Ameshni. So I think from a city perspective, we do follow a different strategy from a primarily cybersecurity stance, to be honest. So both in the operational technology environments, such as the critical infrastructure, in our water and our energy and waste environments, we do follow a strategy of segmentation. So those environments only peer with the corporate environment for very limited information, and we ensure that there is very clear segmentation and separation between both the operational technology environments, the industrial control system environments as well, if we think about what we're having to do from a load shedding perspective as well. So segmentation is the primary control in that space, and we provide guidance to those departments who are managing those environments. So from my perspective, our primary mandate is to manage what we would call the corporate environment, where we maintain our HR, billing, finance systems, etc. But typically those environments are kept very separate from the corporate environment. Thank you. Ameshni, back to you.
Okay, great. All right, so I see Serene's posting a lot of the questions, and I see he had one more question on Eskom. Serene, would you like to active?
Would you mind?
Yeah, I'm happy to chat. Yeah, so the question there was really when I refer to critical infrastructure, I wasn't referring to your IT infrastructure. I was actually referring to the critical infrastructure in terms of water, electricity, sanitation, things like that. So in that context, obviously, Hilton did not address my concern or question. It was really around those types of service providers. So if you think about, and this probably would be a nice point to extend the question to Itumeleng as well, is to ask a question around, what is the government or the Western Cape government and the city doing to partner with the financial service providers, as they can be deemed as critical infrastructure, given the financial systems. What are they doing to strengthen the partnerships, and is there a partnership so that we don't have disruption to our financial systems that could obviously impact the Western Cape or even more broadly the national citizens of this country. Okay.
Great, thanks so much, Ren, for that. Mr. Maleng, do you want to take that one in terms of your view from a private sector perspective? And I think the question's very much related to, kind of how does public and private come together, and how well are we doing in this space?
Yeah.
Okay.
Seren, I think that is a very important point that you're bringing up around the partnership between public and private sectors. Because really, information security or cybersecurity is not something that we can manage in a bubble in isolation, because it is an end-to-end process. It might start in the private sector and end up impacting public sector and vice versa. So I really think there's more that needs to be done in that space, definitely not enough. There are some forums where public sector cyber leaders and private sector do collaborate, but I still think it is still at a very high level where we're actually not rolling our sleeves and saying, let's work together to come up with an approach that can work for both parties or for both sides of business. So we're not where we should be, and we should be doing that. But I know there are some initiatives that have already started where cyber leaders from different industries are coming together to share ideas. So it's something that we probably just need to think about and take forward in ensuring that ultimately, for the benefit of the country, we are all doing the right things and sharing our skills and knowledge to shift the dial from a cybersecurity perspective.
So Maleng, just to follow up on the question about the collaboration across different industries. Look, I'm aware of many informal sort of collaborations. Is there some kind of formal approach or mandates that's being driven by government as such, whether it be through Kiru Pillay or some other sort of government body that says, we've got to establish, very similar ISAC type committees or groups like we have in the US. So, from my perspective, I'm a cyber leader at a very large multinational organization as well. But I just feel that there's just so many barriers to collaboration in the country. And the question would be, what can we do differently to break down those barriers so that we actually build trust? We talk about trust, but actually we don't have trust amongst the cyber leaders that are responsible for protecting our organizations, right? So, what can we do differently? So, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. And this is open to the entire panel.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, I'll kick it off, then the others can also weigh in. So as far as I know, there isn't a mandated policy or process that requires us to do this actually from I'd say from a government perspective. It is the initiatives that I know about have just been initiated by people that share the same interests, and you invite people over. Some of them have just started as WhatsApp groups and we come together. But like you said, even amongst ourselves, there's still that lack of trust that can I share my information with the next person, and how is that going to be used? Or how is it going to be perceived if they look at my cyber response strategy and how I might have, say, be perceived as having failed in a certain incident or scenario. So it's something that we need to work through and ensure that we all have a clear understanding of the shared objective that we have. As much as we wear different hats, we come from different organizations, but if you think about the golden thread that we're looking through in understanding how do we protect all of our organizations together, I think that's the important thing that we need to work towards. I mean, if we look at the example around the shortage of skills within cybersecurity, we all talk about this. You go to different forums where you're talking about cybersecurity, we all keep saying there's a shortage of skills, but we're not coming together to put a plan in place on how we can all solve this. How do we pull in the higher education institutions to say, build your curriculum in such a way that when someone graduates from the university, they are ready to plug into a cybersecurity team and actually work, instead of having to start from scratch, going through certifications. And it takes a couple of years before you can get someone to a point where they're ready to do that. So there's still a lot of collaboration that is required, bringing the education sector, private, public, etc., to ensure that we get to a point. I actually don't know where to start. I don't know the answers, but I know it's something that we definitely need to do. Great,
thanks so much for that, Maleng. I think that's a
That's a great answer, and actually kind of ties into as we move up now into wrap up. You know, I was going to, yes.
Can I just respond to Suren's question, because he did say that I've misinterpreted his question. If I have a brief opportunity to respond to that.
Sure, no problem.
Sure. So thanks, Umeshni, and thanks for the question, Suren, and thanks for clarifying. Because when you spoke about the infrastructure, and then I went into the operational part of it, and my understanding was that infrastructure deals with the broader infrastructure environment, and then I brought it down to the more operational part. And that's not what you want to hear. You spoke, and your question specifically relates to how does information cybersecurity or extend to our infrastructure or our operational infrastructure. But I do think that, yeah, sorry, I'm trying to get to that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So I'm talking about the industrial control system. So the equipment that you use for, you know, potentially, you know, for taking care of the electricity grid, or the water systems, or whatever the case might be. Those are industrial control systems, right? So my real concern is around that. If you've seen some of these attacks overseas, specifically in Florida, where they've contaminated the water systems, you know, I have similar concerns about that locally as well. So, you know, there seems to be an emphasis on IT, but not on the OT aspects. And that's why I asked a question around industrial control systems.
Sure.
So I think you've adequately answered my question on the IT side. It's the OT side that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay, so my response would have, and if you haven't clarified that, my response would have been once again into our continuity processes for energy, and then also for water, which we have structured engagements and structured processes within our Western Cape government. But as it relates to those specific infrastructures that you're referring to now, it's generally outside of the ambit of our Western Cape government. And I think in some of one of the speakers, I think it was Gabriella, who spoke about we have different spheres of responsibility. It's outside our sphere of responsibility as it relates to energy and our energy infrastructure, and water and our water infrastructure. Those are outside of our ambit. So in that sense, we will not be focusing on that. What we'll be focusing on is our supply into our organization to provide for that. And with that, we work with our cloud service providers, making sure that we have consistent supply of that services, and then also with the State Information Technology, which is responsible for certain services. We'll work with our disaster management center, which is responsible also for energy and water. So that would have been the extent of my response in that regard. As I said, those areas that you're focusing on and that you're referring to are outside of our space. Perhaps it could be in the space of the city of Cape Town. I'm not sure in terms of specifically the water supply, and they might be able to respond to that, but it's not in our scope, and that's why I will not be able to respond to that. Umeshni, maybe Alan will be able to respond on that one, if there's time.
I'm afraid we've lost Herb, so please go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, Hilton, so similar to Western Cape government, the city does approach a strategy of segmentation to ensure that we keep the corporate environment safe from OT, and OT more likely safe from corporate. From a skills perspective, the skills that we leverage on a day-to-day basis from an IT perspective do not translate well into the OT space or into the ICS space. So typically, as I said previously, that we do segment, and even within those OT environments and ICS environments, be it water, be it electricity, we also tend to keep them separate from each other as well. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I think you've answered my question.
Great, thanks all. Apologies, I had a glitch in connection. All right, good. Thank you, Alan, for taking that in terms of closeout. We are getting towards the end of the session, and so I'd like to give each panel member just a quick chance to be able to give a quick wrap up in terms of the question of cyber resilience. And so I think if you had to give a takeout point to the audience as panel members, I'd like to hear from you now in terms of what your key takeout would be in terms of answering that question of how can you really as an organization think about becoming cyber resilient for the future, and what would be that key takeout that you'd like to give away? Itumeleng, can I start with you?
Sure. So obviously, my key closeout comment would be that cybersecurity or resilience is not an IT risk, it is a business risk, and it requires collaboration across the business. I think we've spoken a lot about this. So bring in your HR partners, your audit partners, all your risk partners. Your chief risk officers need to be part of the conversation in order to ensure that you're managing the risk across the board. It shouldn't just be a standalone sitting in IT.
Great, thanks Itumeleng for that. Gabriella.
Yeah, and I suppose my comment, is sort of embracing the complexity of these systems, and the most successful organizations will be the ones that do that, and noting that don't think that your organizational policy is disconnected from national policy or provincial policy or local policy. There were early drafts of the cloud policy from the Department of Telecommunications that looked at mandating data localization, which has very direct effects on how you actually experience the act of trying to create secure services for your business. So yeah, embrace that complexity, and know that it can be an opportunity, and that these national level conversations also need to extend to capacity, education, and digital skills, which is a very, very important part of the national conversation, that has direct implications on how everybody experiences cybersecurity in their organizations.
Great, thanks so much for that, Gabriella. Hilton.
From my side, I think it's important to understand what your clients want in terms of information security. I think the requirements are general, but understand what your key goals are, and then invest in the right technologies. Make sure that you change the culture in your organization, and making sure that people are cyber aware, and also practice safe processes when they do engage over the internet or whatever platforms they're engaging, and then also making sure that you have the right skills development, and continuously developing the skills of your staff internally and getting the right mix of skills externally. I think that's critical to making your organization cyber secure.
Thanks so much, Hilton. Helen, any final comments?
Thanks so much, Nick. I think just in terms of practical advice, probably more at the operational level than at the strategic level. One of the key aspects of resiliency is really around that balance of security versus recovery. And one of the practical ways I've been able to really review and assess where we're at on a day-to-day operational basis is to use frameworks such as the NIST cybersecurity framework. So look at not just protecting, but also being in a good state to be able to respond and recover appropriately. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Alan. Okay, so that really were the key takeout points from our panel experts. On that note, I'd like to give a huge thank you to each one of you for taking the time out to really speak to us about this concept of the difference, I think, between cybersecurity and what it means to be cyber resilient. And I do hope that coming out of this session, that as organizations that you've heard about that in terms of what those differences are. One of the key takeouts I think I took out of this was the importance of ensuring that cyber resilience has a space at the table, at the executive table, and that across the organization, that it is clear that it is everyone's business and not the business of a particular part of the organization. So I'd really like to thank you all for your time. I'm just quickly going to check if there's any final comments from the audience, if you'll give me a second. And then if they aren't, I'm happy to highlight that we can close the session. So if you'll just give me a second. Okay, good. It doesn't seem like there's many more comments. I'd like to thank you all for your time today. Very much appreciated. And I very much thank you for thinking about Futurecasting in terms of the resilience space. And I hope that you have gained much knowledge from the experts that have been around you. Thank you all for your time. Much appreciated. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Cheers, folks. Thank you.